Talk to me a little bit more about the relationship between recruiters and sourcers and how vital that relationship is. And then how can organizations truly empower their sourcers to build strong talent pipelines while preventing burnout?
Sourcing really stemmed from, I think, big tech. Sourcers would find the candidates from all these databases, could be inbound, could be active sourcing, could be just all these platforms and tools. And they are essentially engaging with the candidate up front, maybe sharing compensation, culture benefits, hiring guides. Once they've been qualified, pre-qualified to interview, they pass them off to the recruiter, and the recruiter now is managing their entire process to meet with the hiring team. And that's the hiring manager and their peers, maybe some cross-functional stakeholders, and being there at their concierge and their support system throughout. And I think the reason why that was split was essentially there's only so much work an individual can do across the entire recruiting spectrum, right, or life cycle. We're also missing one: coordination. Recruiting coordinators essentially are the ones managing schedules. And it may sound super simple, but like, hey, there's Calendly nowadays, or there's other tools you can kind of use to self-schedule. But there's also a human component. Like, how many folks actually I can actually share with you? There's oftentimes I'd have to follow up with folks even after sending a Calendly because time in a day, and if you're able to kind of schedule on your own or whatnot. So having a recruiting coordinator or some sort of individual in the operations piece continue to connect the dots on folks actually meeting is huge. I think you can jump into your career just as a recruiter in the right company. So Crunchyroll, I came in as a recruiter, but there was an expectation to source for candidates as well. Small enough company, you can do both roles. But as companies grow, you're going to need, and you're continuing to hire for like a greenfield role in software engineering and product and customer service, maybe. You need someone to actively keep that database healthy and alive and full of folks that are actively looking or could be passively looking, and you reconnect every month, every 3 months. So that would be, in my mind, an ideal sourcer job, is to kind of maintain top of funnel, what do you call it, referral base, active database of folks in your community, and then hand off to the recruiter to kind of make the rest of the process as seamless as possible. So recruiting coordinators, sources, and recruiters themselves, that sometimes could be a one person job in an early stage startup. And if you're operating in that capacity, that can also extend into like a head of talent position where you're doing business analytics, you're doing reporting, you're doing talent mapping and marketing, you're doing headcount planning, and you could even be doing some compliance work as well, which is more of a chief people officer. So it fluctuates as the company grows, and it really depends on where you're at in your career. So again, folks can come in as a sourcer, coordinator, or recruiter. But to your point, typically and traditionally, folks would start out as a recruiting coordinator, go into sourcing, understand like kind of their department, the roles that they're trying to fill, study the Boolean searches, study the tools that are out there, study how to correctly message someone with a professional tone or more of a company branded tone. And then you move on to recruiting, which is essentially the first term I heard of 10 years ago was full cycle recruiter, full desk recruiter, which stemmed from the agency world, where you're doing everything. You're even, you're gathering clients and you're finding candidates and you're kind of matching them and marrying them throughout your process.
How do you empower sourcers, right, to do their best work? Oftentimes it's seen kind of as, like you're mentioning, just like the database, talent database management. And I imagine that there are times when, you know, there's a lot of burnout that could potentially happen. So how does a recruiting team give the best organizational setup or the tools to help a sourcer succeed?
I think there's the idea of crawl, walk, run. So you show them the basics, they kind of get in tune with that. Then they start doing it on their own. And then now they're fully fledged, they're not just operating without any guidance. So there's a mentorship capacity to it. I think though nowadays we can fast track folks to become really good sourcers with the tools that are available and documentation. Learned this from a gentleman by the name of Parsh Vora. He was a Crunchyroll director of engineering. When he was onboarding new engineers that were remote, it was difficult to kind of find time with them, given all the initiatives that we had going on. So he built a self guided onboarding document for folks to log into their accounts, figure out where the repo lives in GitHub, what the most current product is, current code base, company mission, who to reach out to that are cross-functional stakeholders across the entire company. And that, I think, if we can model that, duplicate that for recruiters and sourcers, you can teach someone to do this at a much faster pace. I wouldn't say overnight. I wouldn't say it's the easiest thing to do, but imagine if there was a handbook that says, hey, here's how to onboard yourself to become a sourcer. Here's the tools you use. Here's the Boolean searches that are tried and true. And here's how you create variables and version 2 and 3 and 4 of this type of workflow, and have them tested in the sandbox. But I think there are tools out nowadays you can just begin to source. Oh, actually, there's a platform. It's called sourcing.games. It's a really fun, interactive sourcing game that allows you to understand the thought processes and the methodologies and the strategy around finding folks online. And it takes you from a very basic image search using Google, reverse imaging. Then it gets as comprehensive as, opening up the code behind a Chrome browser, figure out people's passwords, and some really fun stuff. So I think there are tools out there. It's just when you think of traditional recruiting and sourcing, people like to do it the way they've always done it. Right? Here's a sheet of candidates, most likely on a Google sheet. Let me know what you think. I'll get back to you. For sourcing, I think there are ways to kind of systemize it to where people are aligned across the entire recruiting stack.
I think you highlight a really good point about documentation. I think that spans even just beyond recruiting, whether it's documentation on, onboarding, documentation on just, general processes. Like in general, I think sometimes like not, especially in like marketing orgs or like probably engineering orgs, like less focus on documentation. As you're scaling, you do need documentation, and especially in kind of this AI world, you do need a lot of documentation to provide context to make kind of the best decision possible.
I'm a big believer in documentation. As much work as goes into it, it's slightly painful. But once you get towards the tail end of completing that document, you're like, okay, cool. Now I can just copy and paste this or share this link to anyone that has the same question. And it saves you a bunch of time.
Do you have any examples of how AI would really help empower sourcers and recruiters to, find more top technical talent?
If we take like a job description now from a startup and just throw it in ChatGPT and say, hey, analyze this document and convert it into a Boolean search string for the role that I'm looking to hire for. 3 seconds later, you get a Boolean search string. Now, what you do with that could be just dumping it into Google, and so you can find folks that way, using recruiting.net, which is a public platform, doing that way, or you could just dump it into like a tool like Juicebox. It's a huge leap in what we used to do, which was find the keywords in the resume, or I'm sorry, in the job description, copy and paste that into a search tool, maybe do some Boolean search and functions and or functions and parentheses and double parentheses. And that used to be the holy grail of sourcing, was being able to write out fantastic Boolean search strings. And there are folks out there, like the best of the best, that I've seen at like SourceCon. They'd have pages, like Google Docs, of a single search string for a very specific type of profile in a very specific industry. And we're talking tech, but we're also talking very niche tech and like, hardware or mechanical or robotics or environmental that not many folks talk about because it's not, the big software tech companies. But there are Boolean search strings out there that will hyper target a very specific PhD profile of a doctor who's worked on cutting edge science that isn't even like publicly available. If you take that and your first pass is through GPT, then you can say, cool, thanks for the Boolean search string. Can you create a persona of what this person would look like online? When I say look like, I mean just as far as content, not necessarily like an image. And ChatGPT, and I've done this number of times now, will provide a persona of this person's day-to-day, maybe their name and why their name matters, their work history, their hobbies, where they could have went to school. And that, again, is saving hours upon hours of time on, just us humans thinking about where to find these folks. You copy and paste into a Notion doc. Now you have a persona and you have a Boolean search string. You just kind of keep all this stuff documented somewhere outside of ChatGPT. As much as I love these AI tools, it's always nice to have your own space to kind of collect all your information. And then from there, after building the persona, you say, hey, where can I find these folks across the United States, across Latin America? And they will actually give you very specific areas of the world where there's a density of, let's just say, security engineers in the Research Triangle, North Carolina, or Golang developers in Colombia, or I don't know, Java engineers in Mexico or JavaScript engineers in San Francisco. All that can just be a discussion with ChatGPT. And then whatever you do with that information afterwards is your own sourcing techniques. Do you use Juicebox? Do you use LinkedIn Recruiter? Do you utilize your network? That just kind of becomes your own. But the initial information, which I appreciate this process, I know it's tried and true. Yes, there may be some hallucinations, but what are the chances of it being less accurate than what I've done in the past from just a manual input process? However you get to the end result on finding that specific profile is up to you. But I think the fastest way and most efficient and accurate way is to kind of go through the process I just outlined.
Beyond the basics, what are the key skills and differentiator that elevate a good technical recruiter into a great one, especially when it comes to closing top talent?
What separates a recruiter in general from the top 10% of recruiters is really doing your research, understanding your customer, providing an experience that is memorable. Right? And it doesn't have to be lead up, doesn't have to end up with them being hired, but there's folks that I've interfaced with years ago, and we still keep in touch. There was no like end result of getting them hired somewhere or me getting hired somewhere, but there's always that like, hey man, they treated me well during the interviewing process, and vice versa, they were a great candidate. And that's something you can't necessarily duplicate, right, through AI. You have to have these experiences that you create yourself, which then becomes an extension of your brand. So if you want to be great, understand your customer as best as you can. If you can somehow build rapport in tools you've used and technologies you've understood and past work history, and I think a lot of software engineers that become recruiters already have this immediate rapport. Like, hey, I used to be a software engineer. I'm a recruiter now. I've joined the dark side, so to speak, but I'm here to help you type deal. As much as you can understand the individual's world that you're operating in, the better off you'll be. This is just a basic customer service concept, right? So if you're servicing folks in a French restaurant, understand the culture, understand the wines, understand the way the food is delivered and the types of ingredients that go in it. That'll make you probably the top 1% of service in that French restaurant. I'm hiring and I'm searching for engineering, product and design folks. I better understand how engineering, product and design, operates within a company, how they interface, how they, work together. And now if I'm going to go super far in the niche and understand and work with, and hire AI engineers, I better understand like the forefront and the frontier technologies of LLMs and what's going on there, which I don't have expertise on, by the way, because I don't necessarily want to keep up with that just at this point. But if you're going to do that, learn as much as you can about the individual's world, and there's a higher likelihood that you'll get in a conversation, and at the very least, have a new network connection if they don't want to jump ship yet.